Good afternoon. It's already 10 p.m. in Prague, so I have a deep evening in here, but I'm full of energy and I'm looking forward to tell you a bit more about the Czech Republic, the country I come from, the European Union, and the rise of populism. It is my pleasure to talk for Global Tides Detroit, and I hope I will be able to visit your beautiful city and to do some research after the pandemic is over. So I will focus my today's talk specifically on the Czech Republic, or Czechia. Thanks to its strategic position right in the heart of Europe, it has always been a meeting point, a center of business and culture, and the place where the West met the East. Let me begin with a very brief introduction. I hope my presentation is visible to you. Let me know if not. The Czech Republic is a parliamentary democracy. Its supreme law is the Constitution of the Czech Republic, together with the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms. And in its current form, the Constitution has been valid since January 1st, 1993, since the date the independent Czech state was established as a result of the separation of Czechoslovakia into two parts, Czechia and Slovakia. And Václav Havel, you probably know, became the first head of state. The president is a formal head of state and also commander-in-chief of the armed forces. And since the foundation of the independent Czechoslovak state in 1918, after the World War I, has had a strong authority and position. This tradition of Czechoslovak and later Czech presidents and the symbolism connected with this role has always eluded the logic of a parliamentary system. And Czech prime ministers have always had to deal with presidents who sometimes exceeded the limits of their constitutional powers. Since 2013, Czechs have had direct presidential elections, and the candidates are elected by the people. Previous presidents have been chosen by both chambers of the parliament at a unique common assembly. So since 2013, the strong position of the Czech head of state has been even enhanced. And the president has won his own legitimacy from the citizens themselves, not indirectly through their representatives in the parliament. And our current president, Miloš Zeman, re-elected in January 2018 for his second 5-year term, knows very well how to use this power for his own benefit during numerous political crises, tensions in the political scene, and the varying directions of Czech foreign policy. Unfortunately, he is also a leading representative of the wave of populism we are currently dealing with. The head of Czech government, the prime minister, who depends on a majority in the Chamber of Deputies, has always faced the fact that the president is de facto beyond recall, and that the office of the president itself enjoys high prestige. So from time to time, the president intervened with the powers of the government, and above all, he tried to direct his own autonomous foreign policy, sometimes contradictory to the one the government had agreed on. And this led to doubts, conflicts, and different approaches to foreign partners, meaning to the countries of European Union, the United States, Russia, China, and thus to a strange state of affairs in the Czech Republic. We had the last parliamentary elections in October 2017, which brought an increase in power to 3 protest or anti-establishment parties. The ultra-liberal leftist Pirate Party, Pirátská strana in Czech, an anti-European party called Freedom and Democracy, SPD, and then the ANO movement. ANO, the word ANO means yes in Czech, but it's also the short form of the actions of dissatisfied citizens. This party, or this movement, was founded by a billionaire Andrej Babiš, the second wealthiest man in the Republic, also a man surrounded by multiple corruption scandals. Nevertheless, the ANO movement won the election by a large margin, and he became the prime minister. Mr. Babiš is actually a very interesting case. you see the red cap inspiration, which is obvious. It says "Strong Czechia," silné Česko. Andrej Babiš was born in Slovakia, and in 1990s he founded a conglomerate called Agrofert that operates in the fields such as agriculture, logistics, energy, chemical industry, and forestry. Today, about 230 companies are covered by the umbrella trademark Agrofert, worth of $4 billion. It's a very nice family company. What do you think? Babiš decided to enter the politics in 2011, claiming the traditional political parties did not do a good job in ruling the country. He mainly criticized the corruption affairs that were, in his opinion, much more frequent and worse than in the Western countries. And after he stepped into the political arena, many political scientists used the term Berlusconization of the politics, named after Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, who also established his own party. He owned the biggest media in Italy, and he simply dominated the public space. And Andrej Babiš followed his steps. He bought two largest daily periodicals, he bought a radio station, TV channel, and he's using them very effectively to influence the public opinion. His marketing team prepared a smart face-to-face campaign in the streets, and sometimes it looked like Babiš was everywhere. As you can see, he handed out donuts at subway stations in Prague. He was visiting regions with kind of mobile booths with fried chicken. He was meeting people and presented promises of higher wages, pensions, and benefits for various groups of the population. So he devoted an incredible amount of energy and time to the campaign before the election in 2017, and it was worth to him. Now, the Czech Republic, as you know, is a very small country in Central Europe with only 10.5 million inhabitants, with the economy strongly tied to larger German economy and with the most of its foreign trade with other member countries of the European Union. Czechia has been a stable member of the EU since May 2004, and there is no real alternative for us other than deepening integration with the European Union. However, Euroscepticism or the isolationist approach towards the EU has dramatically increased in the past few years. And let me explain you why is that the case. The current situation in the Czech Republic in many ways reflects the past. While they are not directly under the rule of another power, many Czechs feel dominated by larger EU nations. This is especially true of Germany, as the Czechs already have negative historical associations with Germanic peoples who dominate EU decision-making. Now, let me remind you that the Czech lands, or Bohemia, were under direct German/Austrian rule for more than 300 years. And many Czechs see their national identity as having been defined from the outside. And the criticism of the European Union brings up this historical threat to our national sovereignty, the three historical periods in which the Czech lands were under the rule of a foreign power, and Czechs as a nation had to make concessions to survive. I'm talking about three periods. That means the long period under the Habsburg dynasty and the Austrian Empire. We were part of it between 1620 until 1918, until the end of World War I. Then the Nazi occupation during the World War II, and the Soviet supremacy between 1948 and the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, while after August 1968, it was a direct military occupation by the Soviet army. So this is reflected in the many criticisms of the European Union that take the Czech Republic as a pawn controlled by the West. Thus, EU encroachment on domestic issues is also seen by many Czechs as a clear evidence of a foreign rule. There is kind of feeling of lost sovereignty as a result of the EU membership. and Euroscepticism symbolically reasserts lost autonomy. But by its very definition, the membership in the EU uh, means that any member state will have to give up certain aspects of self-governance in order to fully participate in the European project. And the Eurosceptics are able to tap into these, I would say, nationalistic sentiments in order to gain support for their cause, whether or not the loss of sovereignty is real or just imagined. There are many factors that may influence the growth of Euroscepticism, but one of the most significant ones is the expansion of the EU's authority into domestic matters. Critics have said that there is a democratic deficit in the governing of the EU. The decision-making process in Brussels is too distant, too strange, and too complicated. That the EU leaders are not responsible for their decisions to Czech voters and public. The EU bureaucracy, inefficiency, disrespect towards the opinions, feelings, and needs of the people in the member states, and the fact that the European law overrides the Czech constitution and Czech laws in many cases have been recently criticized more often. Brexit in 2016 and the fact that the Great Britain is no more a member state of the EU was a clear warning to the EU elites that the Union needed immediate reforms. I think that the Czech Republic should be in the middle of these changes for the better and the building of a new EU vision, because it's a win-win solution for everyone. We as a nation can show that we are creative, active, respectful to our partners, and not merely the ones who criticize constantly and don't care, sit in the back, let the others to do the work and shout only when we don't like something. Some EU critics among Czech politicians called for a similar referendum, preferably leading to Czechzit, but it's highly unlikely because there is, as I mentioned, there is no real alternative than the EU membership, and the Czechs actually have or benefit greatly from the European single market and EU structural and investment funds. We have drawn billions of euros from these arrangements in past 16 years or 17 years of our membership, so that we could build highways and roads, protect the environment, renovate cities, modernize industry, allow our students to get university degrees from prestigious Western European universities, etc., etc. And yet, more and more people were calling for Czechzit. But why? Before the pandemic, we were experiencing rapid economic growth. We had probably the lowest unemployment rate in the EU, and the quality of life in general was very high. So what the hell was happening to us? Again, we have to look at this trend from a broader perspective, and we see that the rejection of the European Union and common European values is closely tied to populism, the phenomenon of last few years, at least in the Czech Republic. What is populism? Political parties lacking any ideological foundation and using populist appeals emerged in Central and Eastern Europe in general since the end of the 1990s. These parties did not adopt a radical ideology, although substituting for it an anti-political appeal, speaking in this case about the Czech Republic. And until 2010, populism was not a prominent element of Czech politics, meaning mostly parties at the periphery of the political spectrum used some kind of populist rhetoric. Compared to other Central and Eastern European democracies, Czechia had one of the most stable and relatively closed party systems, and it was characterized by almost exclusive unidimensional competition, meaning there was one major leftist party, Social Democracy, and one rightist party, civic democrats. But then, after 2010, the new generation of voters grew up, and these seem to be characterized by lower level of identification with traditional left-wing, centrist, or right-wing parties, and the tendency to be attracted instead by simplified populist promises, and therefore to be linked with the protest parties and movements. And these political entities usually divide society into two antagonist groups: the pure people, the good ones, versus the corrupt elites. They argue that politics should be an expression of the general will of the people. They emphasize a real or imaginary crisis or threat. They claim to speak for the good and honest people and attack the out-of-touch elites. You certainly remember that Donald Trump has often used the claim of draining the swamp in DC during his first campaign in 2016. So it was pretty much the same in here. And furthermore, it is often problematic to identify the parties and movements on the left-right political spectrum, because very often they combine elements from both sides of the spectrum combined with populist language. It is very challenging and difficult to explain how right-wing or left-wing party looks like and works in Europe, because it's very different from America. What we see as normal and usual, it's socialist and far left for Americans. So there is a big difference. So I wouldn't go deeper in the theory of political parties. There is also the important role of charismatic leaders or rhetorical features such as tabloid style, dramatization, and use of social media to spread fake news. If we take a look at populism from the European perspective, we see that populists have established themselves as powerful political forces and have become integral members of coalition governments also in other European countries. Italy, Denmark, Finland. You probably heard about the AfD, the alternative for Germany, that has been growing in the past few years, and means a real threat to the Christian Democrats and Chancellor Angela Merkel. The Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia, 4 countries of Central Europe, maintain closer relations than with the rest of the EU through a local alliance called Visegrad 4 or V4. In recent years, each one of them has had to deal with increasing populism, more or less connected with negativism, focused either on corruption, the heritage of communism, dissatisfaction with developments after the fall of the Iron Curtain, transition to democracy, and dissatisfaction with the EU membership. And again, the EU factor plays a very important role. National interest versus the directives coming from Brussels, and people from countries from the former Soviet bloc are actually very sensitive about any pressure from outside. I've already talked about the feeling of German dominance many Czechs share, but there is another similar comparison. As you know, for more than 40 years following the end of World War II, the communist regimes of Central Europe, including the one in Czechoslovakia, received strategic decisions from Moscow alone. Official propaganda talked about the Soviets as liberators, protectors, the greatest friends, equal partners, but in fact, the countries were nothing more than satellites and subordinated vassals of the Soviet Union. We called these regimes people's democracies, but they were far from any participation or involvement of their citizens in decision-making, of course. And officially, the nation fully supported the communist government in its endeavors, but in fact, the majority of the population hated it or became totally apolitical and didn't care. And that nicely depicts the widespread mood in society in Czechoslovakia and also in other countries of the region in late 1980s, when the communist rulers were so distant from their dominated citizens and the whole communist regime was just a rotten castle falling apart day by day. And so the current relations and the abyss of misunderstanding between Brussels, meaning the European elites or the European leaders, and the individual member countries and their citizens sometimes remind these old times before the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989. You know that the Prime Minister of Hungary for the past, 10, 12 years is Viktor Orban, who is successfully building a semi-autocratic regime, suppressing his opposition and the independent press. And he also represents the populist and nationalistic wing of European leaders, and he's openly challenging his liberal opponents to a political duel for the future of the entire European Union. Viktor Orban has a strong ally in the Polish ultra-conservative party Law and Justice. It's a ruling party in Poland since 2015. The current government formed by the party and led by Mateusz Morawiecki is trying to subdue an independent judiciary, the Polish media, and to isolate the opposition. And seeing this from a broader perspective, liberal democracy, pursued for almost 3 decades after the fall of the Iron Curtain, is in retreat in Central Europe. And populist leaders with autocratic tendencies try to spread the belief that the EU doesn't offer effective solutions to the problems of the current world anymore. And the European Union's leading states, Germany and France, personified by Chancellor Angela Merkel and President Emmanuel Macron, are considered more as opponents and intruders intervening in internal matters than as partners and friends, unfortunately. And our President Miloš Zeman, an experienced politician and prime minister for the leftist Social Democratic Party in late 1990s, has evolved into a very strange prototype of far-right wing populist politician too. He often speaks about the media massage. He is blaming the media for dividing society and widening the gap between the public majority and the elites. And the word elites has a strongly pejorative connotation, just as it does in the US. And with this rhetorics, he can reach out to his many sympathizers, and he perfectly fits into the category of populist leaders in neighboring countries. Some political analysts say that also the Czech Republic might be pulled down into the vortex and move towards the totalitarian quasi-democracy, with the oligarch billionaire as a prime minister and president playing with the constitution as it suits him. This unpleasant image might be indeed close to reality in the future. Today, it's the media, or the power of media, that shapes the views of the public on various issues, including refugees, economic crisis, pandemic, and the leading Czech politicians like to be seen on the TV screen, and they offer popular, partial, short-term solutions and like to blame the EU even for their own failures. On the other hand, there is always some light at the end of the tunnel, right? Growing vigilance against cheap populist rhetoric, and growing interest in public affairs, political literacy, and political participation, starting from the bottom, meaning from the local municipal level. All these I see as a promising proof that the civic society and control mechanisms are still strong, but the journey might be long. A significant part of the population is actually against Prime Minister Andrej Babiš and powerful supremacy of his ANO movement and Agrofert conglomerate, which he still currently controls. In June 2019, we saw a large protest in Prague, actually the largest since the fall of communism 30 years ago, with an estimated 250,000 participants demanding the resignation of Babiš. You can see the pictures. That hasn't yet happened yet. Surprisingly, the protest didn't much affect the voters' support for ANO movement. You can take a look at 4 charts now. The first one is the real election results from October 2017. Political party with a support between 30 and 35%. Beginning of last year, the European Union warned that the Czech Prime Minister might have a conflict of interest. Yay, what a surprise. The European Parliament's Budgetary Control Committee called on Prime Minister Babiš to stand down as Prime Minister or to sell his business. And it also stated that Agrofert conglomerate should not receive EU funds until the issue is resolved. While Czech authorities to be more proactive in tackling fraud, corruption, and tax crimes. Babiš's reaction was a sharp refusal of interference in Czech internal affairs, and he accused all Czech officials of the European Union who also participate in the investigation of being traitors. In addition, he promised his government would produce another massive investment in transport, health, and education, while younger and urban supporters of liberal democracy say the investigation proves that the populist prime minister is a criminal and authoritarian. Most people in the provinces, in the countryside, believe his claim that the charges have been cooked up by the political elite he is ousted. A big fight on the political scene was expected, but something has suddenly changed everyone's plans. Yeah, coronavirus. The first 30-day state of emergency was declared on March the 12th, 2020, and lasted for 2 months, meaning the schools, businesses, shops, with the exception of pharmacies and grocery stores, were closed. The same with the borders and airports. All persons have had to wear the face masks while outside of their place of residence, and a whole set of other restrictive measures was adopted. Naturally, in the crisis of this magnitude, all other problems, including the investigation of Prime Minister, retreated into the background. As we speak now, there are about 150,000 infected in the Czech Republic, 8,000 in hospitals, and unfortunately also 26,000 deaths in Czechia. And we have experienced a significant rise of number of infected people in the past 6 months. During the summer, the restrictions were not so strict. People were not afraid to travel abroad. Then the kids came back to school in the first week of September, and we were hit by another wave of the pandemic, including the more aggressive British and South African mutations. And since then, since late September, it's worse and worse. And actually, Czechia is one of the most affected countries in the world, unfortunately. It's simply not good. And the government tries to act as a crisis manager, and Prime Minister Babiš claims only he has the best plan to recovery the economy. The experts, however, warn that the expected budget deficit of about 22 billion US dollars this year is simply too much, and that it may cause the collapse of many investments in the near future. Also, maybe you heard about the tragic death of Peter Kellner on Saturday. Mr. Kellner was the wealthiest man in the Czech Republic, and he was skiing in Alaska in the US, and his helicopter had some accident, and the whole crew died there. So there are rumors that this may cause another shock on the stock market and even deepen the crisis, which is already too bad. So to wrap it up, I believe we currently stand at the dawn of a new phase of populism, unfulfilled promises, and deceiving of the voters, covered by the fight against the pandemic. Our next parliamentary election is scheduled for October of this year, 2021. So we'll see what happens until then. Thank you for your attention. And if you are too shy to ask the questions now, and you also want to spare my vocal cords, here's my email, so feel free to contact me privately. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Martin. Questions have been pouring in during your presentation, and I want to encourage the attendees to continue to send them directly to me, or you can send them in front of everyone to share your questions. But we've got several really interesting questions. The first one being, how do you think social media, had it existed post-World War II, would have changed the Cold War and the future of Europe, especially with the rise of tribalism, populism? I want to expand upon that question a little bit and ask you about that, as well as about the role of social media and disinformation. How is that affecting politics in Europe, and particularly the anti-EU sentiment?
Well, significantly, Mr. Babiš is using Twitter and Facebook very effectively to communicate with his supporters and with his voters, and from time to time his claims are simply not true, and but it's very difficult to fight against it, because when the prime minister says something and then it has, I don't know how many thousands of retweets, then it's challenging, to explain the truth. In past 4 years he had the very same experience, and I have a friend who works the stock market, and he says, every day everyone was waiting for 8 a.m. in Washington D.C. when the Donald wakes up and then starts to tweet. So what are we going to do now? Are we going to declare war to China, or are we going to attack Iran, or what will I do today? So you had the very close experience with the power of social media, and it's complicated because everyone now compares the information coming from social media to the real information from the regular media, from the newspapers, and that's the biggest threat, I guess. And I think that we have to educate younger generations, because now the kids and the students are, and I know that, I see that because I give lectures at the high schools and at the universities. The students are a bit lazy to read now. It's much easier for them just to read a very short paragraph or just 2 sentences to get some kind of information, and they think that they already know what is it about. But it's not. You have to read a book, or you have to read a paper, you have to read the article, at least to have some idea. So that's why we have to explain them that the short form of all the information, it's not good. But we are living in a very busy world. We are surrounded by information and overwhelmed by information. I understand that it's not easy, to go through all the data and all the information from all around the world. Yet you need some short forms. But I guess it's a never-ending story, and there are specialized websites and specialized associations of free journalists that are focusing on fake news spread by the politicians. We have Sunday debates on Czech television, and after each session there is the analysis of what the politicians said and how many percent of the claims were true or untrue. So it's very complicated. But regarding the Cold War, I'm also doing research on the Cold War, and I'm specialized on the Czechoslovak refugees or emigres who left the country and settled in Western Europe, the US, Canada, Australia. And there were also fake news and rumors. Before they were able to emigrate, they had to spend some time in the refugee camps, mostly in Germany and in Austria. They were living there in kind of vacuum for a couple of months. They already lost the Czechoslovak citizenship. They were waiting. They were applying for visas and working permits to other countries, and they didn't know what would happen. So the communist government in Prague sent some spies and some agents to spread the fake news among the refugees, and they were trying to bring fear into the camps. Now you are the refugees, and now you will be sent to Africa, and you will be working in the working and concentration camps led by former SS officers. So it was also very difficult for them and for the psychology of the emigres who lost everything, who had to leave the country, and now they were waiting for the future. So what's going to happen? Are we going to be back in Czechoslovakia? Are the Americans going to attack the communists? Now we are in the middle of the vortex. Are we going to fight in the Cold War, or are the Soviets going to nuke us? So it was a very difficult time, and even the people who are now 80 or 90 years old, the living witnesses of these old times, who spent some time in the refugee camps in late 1940s or early 1950s, still remember this very ugly atmosphere of uncertainty and of fear. So I would say that if social media existed by then, it would be even worse, because the communist propaganda was very effective in these matters.
Wow. Here's another question. Do you think the recent partnership between Russia and China will affect Eastern Europe and Central Europe in a new dimension?
I mentioned our president Miloš Zeman, who used to be a friend of Vladimir Putin. He was even invited to his dacha in Sochi, by the Black Sea, but that was in 2013, 2014. After the occupation of Crimea, this relation also changed, and our president said that Russia should at least pay some money to Ukraine for Crimea. So the relation is not so close, and the same with China. At the beginning of his first presidential term in 2013, he was full of enthusiasm and full of energy. He visited China a couple of times and negotiated with Chinese politicians to invest billions of US dollars to Czech economy and to buy some factories, etc., etc. But after a few years, he understood the promises of Chinese representatives probably wouldn't be kept. So he also stopped or diminished his support to China. So I think that also other politicians in Eastern Europe came to understand that not everything what Putin or the Chinese president say might be true. So I think that this trust to China and Russia, that it's at the end, at least in the Czech Republic, because the rest of political scene, the rest of political parties doesn't believe in the promises coming from Russia and China, and unfortunately our president has not such a strong role as the American president, for example. So it's not simply up to him. So he can't just decide let's make business only with China, or let's make business only with Russia. We are still in the middle of Europe. We are still in the middle of European Union. We don't have the borders with Russia, fortunately. So we still have many choices. And as I said at the beginning, most of our export still goes to the EU countries. So our ties to both China and Russia are not so tight.
As you answer that question, another question that I'm interested in is sort of came to mind, which is about migration. And you pinpointed in your presentation 2010 as sort of a benchmark year for when sort of some of the populist sentiment started, based on sort of young people's attitudes. And so I wanted to ask two questions, or a related question is, what is the role of migration, particularly migration from Arab nations in conflict, in that growing role of populism? And then a more current question, as you mentioned with the border with Russia, is there a strong attitude towards the situation in Belarus at this time from the Czech Republic?
Yes, the big migration wave, or the migration crisis as we call it, started in the beginning of 2015. It's already 6 years ago. And Czech politicians expressed the will to stay completely untouched by the migration. We said we are in the middle of Europe. We accepted hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian immigrants who assimilated very well. They work hard and they are part of Czech society, so they're okay. But we don't want any Syrians or people from Afghanistan or Iraq. It's the problem of Germany and the Great Britain and Sweden. Anyway, everyone wants to go there. No one wants to stay in Czechia. So they created kind of image of the Czech Republic as a racist, unwelcoming country that wants to stay completely isolated from the migration wave. And actually they succeeded because there were this relocation quotas. If we are talking about, I don't know, 1.5 million migrants, the Czech Republic was asked to accept about 3,000, and we said no, we wouldn't. We were even asked to accommodate for some time Syrian orphans who were staying in Greece in the DP camps. Again, we said no, we won't accept them. So after a few years and after many attempts from the Western European countries to involve the Czech Republic in the solution of the migration crisis, they said, well, the Czechs are hopeless. They wouldn't help in this, so let's forget about it. So yeah, this is also a kind of effective approach. It's not the right approach, but later the Hungarians and the Poles did the same. They said, well, we don't want any migrants. Let's leave Germany to deal with that. Yeah, we didn't help our partners, and we definitely weakened our position in the EU. But it was the decision of the government and of the president. So let's see what happens next. And your next question, Belarus. Actually, from time to time, I take part in the election observation missions organized by the OSCE, by the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. And I was in Belarus in 2015, 6 years ago, for the last presidential election. As you remember, it was very tight. Lukashenko received 88% of the votes, and the second female candidate received 8%. So there was just 80% of difference. But I saw their frauds. The system was prepared for Lukashenko's victory, for sure. They were showing us, meaning to us as observers from Western Europe, they were showing us cameras and protocols and signatures of the members of the election committee, that everything was prepared properly. But at the end of the day, when the lights turned off, no one knows what was really happening with the ballots in the sealed ballot boxes in the closed polling stations. In front of them, there were police officers standing, but we were leaving the last polling station at 8 o'clock in the evening, and we saw a car with someone coming to the polling station, some people entering the polling station, doing something we don't know. So even 5 years or 6 years ago, there was a clear evidence that the election was a fraud, and now it was the same. But I guess that the people. And one more thing, we were asking the locals. So, what do you think about the European Union? What do you think about Western countries? Don't you want to have the liberal democracy as we have? And they said, no, we know that Lukashenko is probably a dictator, but it's everything calm in here. We don't have any social riots. We don't have any demonstrations. Remember that there was still the war in Ukraine, right? and Ukraine is a neighboring country in Belarus. So they were saying, we see what's happening in Ukraine. We don't want any Russian intervention. We just want to settle and to be untouched with your Western problems. So just leave us alone. But I think that is no more true. You saw the crowds in the streets of Belarusian cities. We see that the Belarusian nation wants some change as well, because Lukashenko is in power for how many, 26 years now, or even more. So yeah, so it reminds the Soviet times where Brezhnev and the other Soviet leaders were so long dealing with everything. So let's see what happens. I think that after the arrest of the protest movement leaders, the situation calmed down a bit. Lukashenko made some promises. He also, raised the pensions, and he put more money into education and health system. So I don't know how Belarus will look like in next few months, and I didn't see any strong reaction, maybe with the exception of some diplomatic note out from the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who said that beating of the demonstrators is not a good thing, and that there might be some international surveillance and some observers again. But I don't remember that our president or prime minister said that they break any relations with Belarus, or that they expel Belarusian ambassador. No, but again, it's not only up to them. They have to obey the European decision. And when all the European prime ministers say, well, let's give Lukashenko a chance, then they probably need to accept that.
So I had a question come in. Do you think global democracy has become too cumbersome, at risk, or too diffuse to do long-term planning for trade, foreign policy, or domestic policies?
Well, again, we might analyze the term democracy. What does it actually mean? Are we talking about the liberal democracy we've been experiencing for past 30 years? Or are we talking about the Russian type of democracy, or the semi-autocratic type of democracy? It's a never-ending story, and I'm actually not an expert on the theory of democracy or of the political system. But yeah, we definitely see there is something new behind the horizon. And when the pandemic is over, hopefully in the summer or maybe next year, let's see what happens. Because many analysts say that the human and citizen rights were broken in past few months as almost never before, after the fall of the Iron Curtain. That we were, we were told and ordered to wear the face masks. The large scale of our industry was simply destroyed in a few months. Small businesses had to be closed. The same with schools. So we are talking about the lost generation of the kids who are sitting for more than 6 months now in front of the cameras and in front of the screens, and lose the social contact and contact with their friends. So it's I guess it's much deeper problem than just the theoretical debate about the democracy. No one knows how the world and how our country will look like when everything is over. We have the election in a few months from now. There are some rumors that the ANO movement will lose. There is a coalition of a pirate party and other smaller parties who might defeat ANO, but I'm a bit dubious. I think that Babiš will promise more money to everyone as he did it in the past, and he will win again. But yeah, I'm very curious how the situation will look like. What about you? What do you expect from Biden administration?
Anybody from our audience want to answer that one? I think from my perspective, for us, I think voting policy becomes a very important issue. When we talk about democracy, whether people are able, and there's been a wave of, as you know, I think it's in 43 states, bills to change eligibility. So I think that's a question regarding our democracy. I think some of the striking similarities up down to the red hat of your prime minister is really interesting. I think we have time for probably one last question. Caroline, I have one come in. Did you have others come in?
No, that was the one I had.
I'll go with the last one then. The question that's come in is, does foreign direct investment from West or East really make a political or cultural difference? Does it make any difference? Can it make a difference? Foreign direct investment from East or West, politically or cultural difference in Czech Republic?
Yeah, for example, now there's a big issue regarding the nuclear plant called Dukovany, which needs a reconstruction, and there are 4 candidates to do this, 4 companies. One is Westinghouse from the US. No, 3 actually. One is a French company, and the third one is Rosatom, the Russian one. So there is a debate and a political fight that accepting of Rosatom as the participant of this might be a serious geopolitical issue, and that we rather should leave this to the French company as a partner of the EU, or to Westinghouse as to prove that we are reliable partners of the US. So I don't know if the current government is going to solve this problem. I think that they are going to postpone it and leave it for the next government after the election in October. But yes, any involvement of Russia or of China becomes an issue, and our counterintelligence service warns that any penetration of Russian investments or Chinese investments might become a serious issue in the future, security issue.
Well, Martin, Nekola, thank you so much for a really interesting hour that I think really broadened our understanding of the Czech role in the EU, and then current political situation, political, economic, everything in Czech Republic and in Central and Eastern Europe, and then the global influences that take part. So it'll be really interesting and to see what trends come ahead, and I'm hopeful that things will turn out well for your country and for ours.
Thank you very much, and hopefully I will see you in Detroit very soon.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.